Hello there, Alaskans, wherever you are. Welcome to the Must Read Alaska Show, coming to you from somewhere in Alaska. This is the place where we talk about, you guessed it, Alaska, where we keep the mainstream media on their toes and where we are standing up for what's right in a world run by leftists. You can find out more by heading over to mustreadalaska.com and also checking out the Must Read Alaska YouTube channel for some really great content. But first, let's get this party started.
Thank you, Scott. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome aboard Must Read Alaska, coming to you from somewhere in Alaska. This is a reader-driven and a listener-driven conservative news project launched in 2015. And next month, we're going to be celebrating our first 6 years. What do? We have a news site at www.mustreadalaska.com. It's all about Alaska for Alaskans, and we intend to keep the mainstream media on their toes. We have a Monday, Wednesday, Friday newsletter with updates and special items you don't read anywhere else, not even on the website. And we have Club MRAC, which is our daily legislative bulletin, and it's for discerning Alaskans. And I mean those who just kind of want to know what's going on in the legislature. We've also got a YouTube channel, and we feature political content there, and you can find us on Rumble, which is less likely to censor our conservative content. Sometimes we put things on Rumble that we think are going to get censored on YouTube, especially when it concerns masks and vaccines or things like that. I'm Suzanne Downing, and I am really glad to be joined today by Russell Biggs, who is one of the founders of Reclaim Midtown and Recall Rivera. So welcome to the show, Russell.
Hey, thanks, Suzanne. Thanks for having me on.
And so, what we're about here is really trying to develop better leaders and better policies incrementally. We are not we just expect things to happen all at once overnight. But right now we're having something that is kind of happening very suddenly in front of us, which is the election. There's like 15 days left of this Anchorage election. And we've got a mayor's race. We've got 4 school board members up for grabs there. We've got bonds and borrowing. That means we're going to build things. And then we have this really wild card situation, which is the recall election of Assembly Member Felix Rivera. And you're kind of at the center of a lot of this in the recall election. That I don't know that we've ever actually had one in Anchorage before. So how did all this get started?
Sure. Yeah. Well, it all started with COVID, essentially. We had a very hard left assembly, with a couple of exceptions, motoring along. And I think, a little bit about my background. I am probably one of the typical Anchorage voters that has not really paid a whole lot of attention to the local municipality level elections as I should have. The majority of people that I've talked to and had interactions with during this recall campaign were just like me. They probably voted. They paid a little attention. They didn't really think that it made a whole lot of difference compared to a presidential election or a governor election. So all of that changed with COVID, and it changed for a couple of reasons. Number one, we had the hard left assembly that suddenly were gifted $156 million of CARES Act money. And then we also had a hard left assembly that decided at that time basically to play their hand and implement a lot of very, very progressive, progressive is the right word, progressive agendas that really took a lot of people by surprise. And I felt like the local municipality assembly members basically voted on, whether they should allow another marijuana shop or, there's zoning laws, the bag ban. At the time when the bag ban happened, that was, oh my God, that's that's kind of a new thing for Anchorage. But then when the money came out, Mayor Berkowitz, Felix Rivera, Meg Zalatel, Christopher Constant, Austin Quinn Davison, all of those folks really went all in on their agenda. And that's where I got involved. And I got specifically involved when they closed the meetings to the public. And it wasn't just that they closed it to the public, it was they were passing some very contentious legislations, AO 66, which was going to buy 4 properties, partially with CARES Act funds, but partially with the alcohol tax money. And one of those properties was very close to my neighborhood. And to give you a little bit of background about myself, my wife and I have supported the Downtown Hope Center for years. All of our kids have volunteered there. My wife volunteers there 4 days a week. So we've been involved with the homeless in Anchorage for a long time. And when the assembly started this plan, we found out about that several months before it became common knowledge, just because of the background that we had with supporting the Hope Center. And at the time, I was surprised that they were going to be buying this private property, the Golden Lion. Again, with the CARES Act money was not being going towards that, but it was included in this package. And also in part of that package was what was called AO 58, which was basically the rezoning to allow that to happen legally. And again, to lay some framework on this, transient shelters in Anchorage can only be placed in PLI zoned properties currently.
What's that? What's a POI zone?
So that's considered a public park, public lands, institutions. And if you look at Title 21, and Title 21 is the, years long process that's driven the development of private property and business property and public property in Anchorage for years. Hundreds of people have worked with the zoning, with the administration, and with the assembly to have this plan. And essentially, the assembly was going to, by a broad stroke, completely eliminate the public process in that. They were going to buy these properties, completely ignoring and rewriting Title 21, which hundreds of people have been involved in, to put these private properties, to make them into transient shelters. And when we found out about that, I emailed both of my representatives, and I said, "Hey, look, I'm hearing some rumors about something that might be happening that's going to affect our neighborhoods. That's basically completely disregarding any public input. It's going to go to the assembly, and they're going to vote on it." And I got a reply back that basically said, "Oh, well, there's no plan. We don't know anything that for sure that's going to happen with all this." And fast forward a year later, I know that was all a lie. And I know that because during this process, we were able to track down the realtor that was involved in the sale of the Golden Lion, which actually started 4 years ago. That process started over 4 years ago.
So that's the Golden Lion Hotel, which is close to the Geneva Woods neighborhood, also College Village.
Correct. Yeah.
And it's also right across the street. Yeah. For that. Mm-hmm.
So that was just one of the properties. The other one was the heavily damaged, earthquake damaged Alaska Club on Tudor.
Yeah.
And then a couple other properties as well. But that basically started a big neighborhood involvement with people like myself that said, hey, we really feel like we ought to have a say in this, and it's not, everybody kind of points back and says, "Oh, this is an NIMBY issue." It's not an NIMBY issue, because we've been involved with the homeless for years, but we had some grave concerns about the way the assembly was basically ignoring the Title 21 process and putting these transient shelters in places that were going to directly affect residential neighborhoods, and you can argue about whether or not that's a good thing or bad. But a year later now, one of the things that the assembly has touted, and it's been in the Anchorage press, is that the big success with the Sullivan Arena was the fact that all of these services were centralized. That's something that's been repeated several different times. And that was not going to be the case with breaking these properties up and buying them with the CARES Act money. So as that started, we mobilized as a neighborhood, and we started to go to the assembly meetings. And that was when these 5 days of public testimony occurred, and where you got to, it was basically the seedling for some of the involvement that you see now a year later, which has been very contentious. And the reason it was is contentious and was contentious is because a lot of people had their eyes opened to the fact that this, again, progressive very hard left assembly had already made their mind up. And this was all, I think I mentioned before, kabuki theater. This was a Jedi mind trick, or whatever you want to call it. The minds were made up. We know, based on our public records requests, that they viewed all of not all, but most of the assembly members just viewed this as a nuisance, that the public were showing up, and they had to listen to them. So that
Yes,
was
and that was interesting, because when the public started showing up, they started seeing other things that the assembly was doing as well. And it,
oh
it
yeah,
wasn't just this, it was like, what? You wait, what? You're doing this, you're doing that. And the public was really starting to get their eyes opened about just how radical this assembly actually is.
right, exactly. And I think that was the big aha moment for a lot of people like myself that, have voted. And I've never, been actively involved in any kind of election process, never ran for office, anything like that. And there were a lot of people just like me that suddenly said, hey, this isn't right on multiple levels, not just the CARES Act thing, but all the other stuff that was going on. Again, because I think the assembly members, they went full in, they put all their chips in, and they were going to do it regardless of what the public process should have been. And the way they did that was by using COVID as an excuse to close the chambers. And that was where specifically I said, I am going to try to recall my 2 representatives, because I felt that by doing that, and I sent him an email and said, look, the most basic part of governance is participation by the governed. And I said, the fact that you have closed the chain, you've got this massive room, this huge room, and you're closing the entire room to the public, and you're using COVID as an excuse because it's too dangerous to have somebody 40 feet away from you, just one person, as just a symbol saying, hey, look, the public process is really important. We get it. We want you to be involved. And so, but we also, we understand that COVID is dangerous. We don't know how dangerous it is yet, but we think it's really dangerous. And so we're going to let people, at least one person, come in here as a symbol and give their thoughts, but they couldn't even do that.
But they did let somebody in, didn't they?
Exactly right. Yeah. So that's where I was going with that. They let the people that wanted to give positive testimony to their plan. That was the only people they let in.
Right.
And that was the exact moment. I said, this is a total scam. Like, this whole process is completely a scam. That the fact that, they're clearly not scared enough about COVID if they're going to let people that want to testify, like Mike Abbott, Mental Health Trust, who came in and said, look, and also gave pretty misleading testimony, in my opinion, because he told the assembly that, we've got some property that we could put these transient shelters on that's already zoned for PLI, so it already met the criteria, but he didn't say that they actually had over 100 acres of property, some of it directly next to the facilities where homeless people would need to get services. So, like, down by the med center, basically. So at that point, I said, I have to get involved in this, and I did. And so initially,
well, let's just stop there for just a second, because that's interesting, because you weren't part of the people protesting outside, really. I mean, there were a lot of people protesting outside, but I don't ever recall seeing you there. I mean, you were working with them, trying to work with the assembly, trying to catch their attention and say, hey, course correction here, you're doing the wrong thing. But that didn't work. But while they were shutting down the assembly, there were hundreds of people outside week after week after week.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And, and I watched a lot of the meetings online, and I was watching the night, where people were banging on the door, probably 500 people outside the door, saying, let us in, let us in. And, Suzanne LaFrance saying, are they rioting, when people were honking their horns? And so all that was happening, and that was the reason it was happening, because there was a lot of people that felt just like me, that they were using they were violating the Open Meetings Act by closing the chambers, and then they were allowing people to come in just to give positive testimony when it was convenient to them. So that was the initial process. And so at that point, we wrote a recall application for Mexalatel that basically, defined what we felt was a violation of the Open Meetings Act. And that actually is still in Superior Court. We're probably going to have an answer on that in a couple of months, if less.
Yeah, forgot about that one. That one just ended up in Superior Court, and it just died. What happened?
Yeah, so that's again part of, and I can, I know this isn't must rant Alaska, but I'm going to rant here a little bit because
we rant. Trust me, we rant here.
The recall process is so unfair to citizens, and I can give you multiple examples, but here's one of the examples, right? So the muni attorney is the gatekeeper for the recalls. And so we went and we wrote up a recall application that said, hey, we believe that for multiple reasons that the assembly and Mexalatel, being my representative, is the only one that I can bring a recall against. But I said that I felt like that they were violating the Open Meetings Act, and the muni attorney rejected that application. And so as a private citizen, once it's rejected, the only recourse that you have is now to sue. And, as you know, that's really expensive. And so it's a very expensive, a very long, drawn out process. We're almost a year. It's going to be almost a year by the time this actually gets heard by the court. And then, you can do the math. It takes a couple of months to get these signatures, and then it has to go to the ballot. So potentially a politician, a municipal politician in Anchorage, could do the most heinous act. And if the muni attorney rejects the application for whatever reason, legal sufficiency or factual sufficiency, you're easily looking at a year to year and a half before that person could be actually recalled for valid reasons, which I believe that the violation of the Open Meetings Act is very valid. And I think we're going to win that in court, but we're still having to spend a ton of money and wait a long time, and in the process of that wait, I feel like that they're continuing to, push this agenda because, again, why not? Why wouldn't you? There's no
valve that you can turn and turn these guys off. These guys they're committed. I will say that they're committed to their hard line. I mean, it didn't stop with the bag ban, but it was so funny that how that bag ban was such an important thing to them. But boy, golly, as soon as it looked like it might be a problem, boy, they took that one out, and nobody ever complains about that one now. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, when you think about the reasons people go astray, to kind of be a little philosophical about this, being an agenda-driven politician will really get you down a rabbit hole, like very quickly. And I think, again, I don't hold any ill will to any of these people that are being an elected official is a tough job, and you've got to answer to a lot of different people. And so I don't hold ill will to those folks, but I do believe that people that are following an agenda and that are so tone deaf to the people that they represent, particularly in this case, the constituency of Midtown, if you're not going to listen to the people that elected you because you're so tied into an agenda, you really don't have any reason or you should not be involved in leading those people.
Yeah.
That's the way I feel about it. And that's kind of and that's where we're at right now. So the recall of Rivera, basically the event that occurred was about 2 weeks after the July meeting, I believe, when they closed the chambers completely.
Right.
And that was when, again, actually, let me back up just a little bit. They closed the chambers completely, and there was a massive outcry. The people that were banging on the doors that got their attention. And so I don't know who brought it, if it was Jamie Aller, if it was Crystal Kennedy, that actually brought it up again and said, hey, look, can we at least let one person in here as a symbol? And that very point was being debated. And during that time, the sitting assembly members said, hey, actually we're violating, well, there's too many people in here right now. We're already violating this.
Right.
So at that point, the right thing to do would have been to stop the meeting and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 16, 17, okay, there's too many people in here. We're going to set the right example. We messed up. We're going to get these people out of here. We're going to do the right thing. And then we'll restart the meeting. That's all it would have taken. Like
But
literally.
they always knew. They always
Yeah.
knew it was just kabuki theater. They always knew it.
Yeah.
And so Felix Rivera just kind of nodded his head, yeah, whatever. And he said, yeah, we're going ahead. And that became the basis for this recall, is that there was an emergency order, and the emergency order said, foolishly, no more than 15 people can gather at any place. And of course, he was having the number of people that he wanted in that assembly chamber and excluding the people that he didn't want.
Right. That's exactly what it was. And here is a group of people they're closing down hundreds of Anchorage businesses. They're shutting people's businesses. They're ruining people's financial lives. And the economics of that are going to be felt for years. All these businesses are shutting down, and they're using COVID appropriately, saying COVID is a dangerous disease. We don't know how dangerous it is yet, but we're going to treat this seriously. And in order to do that, we need to now which again, I disagree that you need to shut that entire room down. I think that obviously was agenda driven. But even after that happened, and you've shut all these businesses down, and you can't be bothered for 30 seconds to set the right example that 200 or 300 people on YouTube are watching, maybe even more. I mean, probably thousands by the time it was all said and done. You can't be bothered to actually enforce the law that you're asking and telling and fining $300 tickets for people that are breaking that law. You can't be bothered to enforce that. And that's the reason Felix Rivera needs to be recalled. There's plenty of other reasons, but that specific thing is what made it onto the ballot. And you can argue about all the other stuff. It actually is not an argument. I mean, they diverted probably close to $50 million worth of CARES funds to places that should not have been, that money should not have gone to. That's a lot more of I think a lot of people understand that argument better than the other one, which the mainstream media has kind of spun it as like, oh, well, this is stupid because there's only 17 people in the room. Well, again, it's not about the number of people. It's the fact that it was brought up and they said, hey, by the assembly, hey, we're violating the law. And they just completely ignored it. That was the original sin, I think,
Right. And Felix is the assembly chair. For that meeting. And so, Meg Zalatel too, she has served as assembly chair for some meetings, acting chair as well. Well, that is interesting. And so basically you have, you filed this, the city actually did not fight you on it, but Felix Rivera did. He and his surrogates took it to court. Right. And tried to prevent you from recalling him by getting a court order to say this was a sort of a nuisance recall of some sort.
Right. Yeah. So that happened once it got on. Once it made it through the Muni attorney, which, by the way, actually changed the language. That's another part of this. That's, again, I think patently unfair, that they can actually change your recall language, and they've done that twice. They did it with the Zalatel application, and then they did it with the Rivera application. So they kind of neutered some of the language in the recall, so it's not as strong as it would have been. So that's one thing. But regardless of that, once it was accepted on the ballot, we started the signature gathering, which that was in the middle of COVID. It was in the middle of winter. We had to gather 2,735 signatures, but really that means you have to gather about 4,000 signatures. And we did, and and it was very difficult. And we were able to get actually 4,999 signatures on the sheets. And we submitted it to the clerk, and they said, okay, it's, you've got enough signatures for this to go. And so immediately, Peter Muse and Felix and Meg Zalatel and Elvie Gray Jackson and Andy Josephson, they had this big Zoom fundraiser because now they were going to sue to basically silence the will of 4,999 people in Midtown that had done the work and were following the law. Now they were going to block it via court. And that again is a kind of another indicator of how unfair this process is. So now we had to fight 2 lawsuits to get this basically on the ballot. And so, you know, if we had lost that suit, that would have been it. I mean, we would have had to take it to Supreme Court if we had the funds to do that. But this is all completely grassroots process. I mean, we don't have the union backing. We don't have the nonprofits backing us like Rivera does. And so I think,
well, in the words of our former mayor, you're actually AstroTurf. You're not really
right,
grassroots.
exactly.
You're AstroTurf. So most people in Anchorage and most people in Alaska, we've got listeners all over Alaska, but this is good lessons for people in other places where their assemblies have been taken over. And I remember way back in the 70s when a bunch of radicals came up from down south, and they took over the Democrat Party, and they became the Democrat Party up here became very radical in the 70s, and it has been to this day. But in terms of where this goes, so it goes to the ballot, and that's what people have the ballot in their hands now. Only most of us aren't seeing any activity because this is a pretty small group of people that actually get to vote on this. There's about 14,000 people in that district. How many are in there?
I think that's probably close. Yeah. I mean, in the last election, only, I think it was less than 10,000 people actually even voted. So, or maybe it was around 10,000 people that voted. So it actually may be closer to 50,000, actually, Suzanne, I think.
So it's a 50+1, right?
Yeah.
And so you are still, I presume, working to get out the word in that specific district, but the rest of us aren't going to see that because we're not in that district.
Correct. Yeah.
And so you're doing targeted mailings, or you're doing door knocking, or.
Yeah. So we're doing targeted mailings, and we identified the people that I felt like that were the swing voters on this. And in the last election, the conservative candidate running against Felix Rivera lost by about less than 200 votes.
Okay.
So it's very, it's probably a relatively balanced district, I hope. But again, getting the word out and making sure people understand, because if this is not enough to motivate people, I don't really know what is. I mean, this is like, and the reason it's so important is because, like, really, this is the battle of liberty. I mean, I hate to sound dramatic, but actually being able to have the ability to be involved in your assembly meetings and having people run roughshod over your rights as an Anchorage citizen and Alaska voter is super important. I mean, it doesn't get any more important than that, but it's hard to project that onto people and make them understand, because again, they probably don't, on a day-to-day life, they don't really see how that's going to affect them. And by projection, again, this particular recall will have, I believe, massive effects on the next round of elections in Anchorage as well. And again, just like the mayor, it's almost a referendum about what's happening.
Very good point. So for those who are just tuning in, this is Russell Biggs speaking to us here at Must Read Alaska, and I'm Suzanne Downing, and we were talking about the case of the recalling of Felix Rivera, who is the assembly chair here in Anchorage, Alaska. And Russell Biggs is part of the group that, probably really the founder of the group and the leader of the movement to recall the assembly chair. A little bit historic here, but I noticed, Russell, that the ballot really allowed him a lot of leeway to defend himself. He went on and on in 200 words, went like 200 words plus 4, I think is what I actually saw. But he defended himself as being a really great representative for Anchorage and all the wonderful things that he's done. And none of the things that he talked about in his ballot statement really addressed the core issue. I thought it was pretty funny to see how he used his words.
Yeah, well, because he couldn't, because it was on video. I mean, there's no denying what happened. It was on video. They say, oh, it wasn't proven. Yeah, it was. It would have never. There's 2 parts to the recall process: the factual and the legal sufficiency. And we met both of those. The city agreed. The video agreed. There's no doubt what happened. What the doubt is whether voters will understand that an assembly member that is willing to lock you out of the meeting in order to pass their agenda, except for the people that, agree with them, that those people need to stay in power, basically. And I don't think most people, at least in the way I grew up, don't agree that's democracy.
Now, are you guys doing a ballot chase like you are? Well, I don't want to hear all your inside intel on how you're doing your campaign to get the ballots in, but the ballots have to be postmarked by April 6th, and that's in 15 days from now. So we are down to the end of this campaign. Do you have a list of people? Are you making sure that everybody who signed that recall petition, that they're getting their ballots in? And are you going back to the list as it's published every day to see who's voted and how many votes you have in? What kind of a operation do you have going on?
We're not doing that. We don't have the manpower to do that, or the probably the finances either. But we did identify, with the help of a group, the swing voters. Basically pretty sophisticated mapping based on voter history and things like that. And so we're trying to find, based on our polling, that group of people that will respond to the message, not just the part that we've talked about, but also the fact that that they diverted all this money to buy the properties that should have gone to Anchorage businesses that were failing. That Felix Rivera tried to funnel money to a Democrat-only job program. The fact that they spent all this money basically to build bike trails, which I'm a big fan of bike trails, but the CARES Act money should not have been used for that. At least I don't think so. And then
we did a little research on that. We discovered that a couple of people, they hired a few people. It was like 6 people, and very many people, but like a pretty good number of the people they hired were actually people from out of state who had just kind of come up to work for the summer, and then they went back down to work in they run ski lifts and stuff in Colorado in the winter. They just were thrilled to be able to come up here, and they weren't able to wait tables like they thought they would be able to do, but that was no worries. They got this great trails building job, and so they saved all their money, and then they headed down south. It wasn't a job training program. That was the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. But I got to tell you, Representative Zach Field sold it to the Assembly, and with the support of the unions, my goodness, they sure did get going on some of those trails, and maybe we'll enjoy them in the future if we have anybody left here to enjoy them.
Well, $500,000 to build trails. I hope somebody enjoys them. I mean, it's the same thing with the $127,000 big screen TVs. They buy 6 big screen TVs, which that kind of stuff. We're people like myself and my neighbors, shaking our head at the amount of money that is being outlaid. That should have gone, we're in the meantime, they're giving out $200 gift cards. If you're lucky, you got a $200 gift card to buy diapers or groceries. Meanwhile, shoveling money out to these other, beak wetting union programs or wherever the money was going for the private properties. And unfortunately, people don't understand. I don't think most people understand that the amount of money that those properties will eventually require for upkeep is astronomical. It is basically any economy of scale that you would have, for the Sullivan Arena is a good example. That's $1 million a month. They're spending $1 million a month to take care of 400 people currently, plus the other money that goes to the private hotels that, Mark Begich owns one of those, $120 a night, or sorry, $55 a night for a hotel room there, plus the security to take care of those buildings. So all of the economy of scale that you would get for $1 million a month at the Sullivan Arena is now going to go out the window, and you're going to divide that by 3 or 4 more properties, and you're building this industrial homeless complex. People talk about that, and that's a real thing. I mean, that's really happening. And I know, based on the work that we've done with the Downtown Hope Center, they can feed somebody for about 88 cents. So you can come in as a homeless person, and you can get a sandwich and a soup for 88 cents. They do great work. They've got a jobs program for the women's shelter They have women that stay overnight. They teach them how to be pastry chefs. It's a wonderful program, and I can't recommend it enough. If you're looking for a place that you want to donate money that actually is going to help the homeless population, that's the one to do it, because they're providing people a place of refuge, and then they teach them how to go out into the community and have a job. So 88 cents to feed someone there versus the Muni programs, which is about $5 a meal. So, again, there's this massive outlay of money that's going to be multiplied times 3 to 4 more properties that somebody needs to be paying attention to. That's where the CARES Act funds, all this money that's going out the door, that appears to not really have been audited much at all. In Rivera's ads, one of the things in his ads that they're put out on Facebook was something, I think it said, look at our history of we spent $61 million for these funds that done all these good things. I'm like, well, where'd the other $100 or $90 million go? Why are you talking about just the 60? Why aren't you talking about the 156 million? Like, what happened to the rest of that money? And that's, again, probably about what this is about too.
That's a don't ask, don't tell situation. Well, we really, really appreciate having you on the show today. And boy, that half hour went by so fast. It just blew my mind. And you've got a wealth of information for people, but you have a website. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's recallrivera.org, recallrivera.org.com. And we're on Facebook under Reclaim Midtown.
Okay, Reclaim Midtown. I always get that mixed up with Reclaim Anchorage, but Reclaim Midtown it is. And I appreciate this conversation. It's been fascinating, and I enjoyed it so much. And I noticed that we're using the Zoom application to do this broadcast today, folks. And I noticed that he's out in the wilderness somewhere, because he's kind of a wilderness guy. And I can see out the window, he's in the middle of nowhere, but I'm in somewhere in Alaska. And before you go, please sign up for the Must Read Alaska newsletter, everybody. You get a ton of great information, and go to the website, mustreadalaska.com. Find out more from Russell and his group at Reclaim Midtown on Facebook and recallrivera.org on the web. And be sure to tune in for the midweek Must Read Alaska podcast, which is usually up by Thursday morning, right, Scott? And Scott is doing a great job hosting that show by himself on Wednesday evenings. And you'll find out if you listen to that last week's show why I donated $5 to the Forrest Dunbar campaign. It's not what you think it is, folks. Go listen to that show. If you're a supporter of Must Read Alaska, thank you so much. It makes it all possible for us to stand up for what's right in Alaska. And if you want to support the conservative side of the news, the donate button is on the right side of mustreadalaska.com. And that allows us to stay strong, independent, thoughtful against that big blue wave of liberal activist news media. Anyway, till next time, folks, we're signing off from somewhere in Alaska.